Since this isn't an official meeting, since we don't have a quorum, we're just having conversation with Krista.
Hello, this is Krista Westerberg.
Hi Krista, this is Dave Kokendorfer. How are you?
Good, I'm fine. How are you doing?
Real good. See, I've got another individual. I'll let him introduce himself. He's on the negotiating committee also.
Hi Krista. Hi Krista. This is John Bonsick, B-O-N-C-Z-Y-K.
Great, good morning.
Good morning to you.
So, Krista, we'll just start out then. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm an attorney in private practice in Madison. I've worked in private practice in Madison since 2002, so for about 23 years. And 2002 when I graduated from law school with the University of Wisconsin.
Okay.
And then for most of the time since I've graduated, I've been doing land use, environmental zoning cases, some open records cases, and then other assorted civil litigation
Okay.
of various kinds. But the bulk of my practice is land use and zoning, and environmental. So, so that's sort of the background. And I've done at least one case involving the landfill, and I think that was where you got my name, because we had worked with Kathy Campbell in
Yes.
the town of Seymour.
Yes.
So I'm familiar with those laws, but that's sort of broadly my background.
Okay. So you've actually negotiated just for one landfill so far?
Well, we didn't, yes and no. Yes, so one landfill, that is the yes. And then, our firm didn't represent the negotiating committee. We represented citizens in the town of Seymour who believed the committee wasn't doing enough, essentially.
Okay.
The committee took a pretty passive approach, to the proposal. And so we ended up pushing them to do a little bit more, on that.
Okay. What type of things in negotiation, were you pushing for?
In that case, it was an expansion, and we were pushing for better property value protection and what they call sociological payments. And then, also better measures for things like, garbage pickup when garbage goes off the tops of trucks and, collects on the side of the road, and, some things that are more aesthetic or, make the project more livable for the neighbors and, for the town.
Okay. So you were involved in one negotiations as far as the citizens.
Yes.
How else have you been involved in landfills?
I'm trying to think. Probably not a lot on landfills specifically. We have dealt with some other kind of waste issues, like manure storage lagoons. Have a lot of experience with those, so familiar with some of the hydrological issues that are common to both landfills and waste storage lagoons. And we know a lot of the folks at DNR, who work on those issues. And then, as part of the work we did in the town of Seymour, I became familiar with the case law and negotiation, first certainly with the process, and how other cases have been decided when it does go to court, and then other kinds of agreements that are out there.
Okay. Have you dealt with the siting board or done anything with basically I'll just say the siting board and things like that?
Yeah, the state level board.
Yes.
No, I have not directly
Yes, Kathy spoke, quite highly of you, so that's, one of the reasons why we're giving you a call.
Okay, yeah, they were, her knowledge and education that she gave herself on those issues was just so impressive. So it was great to work with her, it was so nice of her to say.
Yes, she certainly provided us a great deal of information also.
Great, yeah.
What else can you tell us about yourself?
Well, happy to, well, we tend to work statewide because a lot of the issues that our firm works on or that I work on here, we typically get called in, we do represent governmental entities, like I should say that, cities, villages, towns, and it's not a lot that, and lake districts, we represent lake districts, and it's typically we get called in not for their day-to-day work,
Okay.
like, you show up at the normal, monthly meeting and just be there to advise. We get called in to represent groups like that when there's something different. Or, when a municipality has an issue that's a little bit atypical,
Okay.
and is an environmental related issue. So we get called in on, when there's a different kind of development than the town or village or whomever is normally dealing with. So like whether it's a factory farm or a energy development or, and you name it, we've kind of had some of these oddball things that have come up that are just not normally within the experience of a typical municipal attorney.
Okay.
So those are the cases where we tend to be representing a governmental body, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I guess one experience that I had drawing out of the town of the Seymour experience, but I've seen this in other municipalities too, especially when we're representing, citizens who are appearing before a municipality. One thing that drives me crazy is when the governmental body sells itself short, and doesn't either realize the leverage that it has or it doesn't use the leverage that it has,
Okay.
which can be a disservice to citizens because, there are ways, like if you have bargaining power, I feel like you should use it, and that's gonna be better for your constituents at the end of the day. So,
In that example, like, let's say, going back to Seymour, what additional things were you able to negotiate above and beyond the board?
well, we weren't directly involved in the negotiation.
Okay.
But we just had to encourage the board to seek certain things, and those are the ones I was talking about before.
Okay.
And so in your case, the town of Stubbs, are you seeking, is it the town itself that is seeking a representation, or is the actual committee composed of like the multiple governmental bodies that are affected by the landfill?
Yes, well, the town of Stubbs, we've got the actual board, and it's a 3-member board. And the negotiating committee, consists of 2 members of the board and 2 actual residents in the community. So that's how it's comprised. And then the landfill is actually right in the township.
Okay. So it's the negotiating committee that's seeking their representation,
Yes,
not the Stubbs specifically, okay.
yes, and then the actual board, needs to approve it once it's passed on to once the negotiating committee passes on to the board.
Okay. And is there any other governmental entity represented on the negotiating committee, like the county or adjoining, like towns or anything like that?
None at all. It's much different than Seymour, where you had 3.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that helps to know. And you said you have a 3-member town board?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Krista, is there anybody in your firm that does, help or direct negotiating with a landfill? I know you said you haven't had a lot of experience in the negotiation end of it, like such as tipping fees and that?
Oh, sure.
Is there somebody in your firm that specifically, handles that end of it?
No, I would say that I think it's kind of a rare thing to have lawyers who negotiate with landfill, period, but, you know, there are attorneys here, including myself, who do some work on contracts and other things, and so, you know, there are kind of some common issues with respect to negotiation with, you know, private entities, and I think, you know, we could handle that in this case. But yeah, to answer your question, no, not specifically, but, you know, backing out and more generally looking at those issues, I would say yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions that you have, John?
No, that was my main one, was if we could get a little bit of, yeah,
Okay, good.
Yeah, I certainly understand that governments, lots of people have different interests, or, you know, than a citizen group or neighbors would have, on a landfill, like, and protecting itself and making sure it's covered financially for the expenses that are related to the land.
You bet.
So I think we could do that, certainly. So it's obviously case dependent, but understand where your interests lie, for sure.
Let's just talk your fees. How do you charge, hourly? How do you charge?
Yes, we do charge hourly. My normal rate for organizations is $365 an hour, but for governmental entities, I tend to charge a lower rate of $320. And then I have associates that I work with that I can sometimes delegate work to, and they bill at a lower rate even than that.
Okay. Travel time, is that at the same rate or a different rate?
I typically, that can be negotiable, honestly, I do it a little differently for different clients, so if you have sometimes we'll charge at a half, you know, 50% rate or something like that for travel.
Okay. Yes, it's, what, about 3.5 hours up here, I believe? From Madison?
3.5 to 4.
Yes, they did, yeah.
Okay, okay. Tom or Dave, do you have any questions for the, there's a couple of people in the audience, we'll just ask Tom, any questions?
No, I do not.
Okay, Dave?
I do not.
Okay. I don't have any, John?
No, she covered pretty much what we needed to know
Yep.
for the starters.
You bet.
And we can always, if we have any more, are you available sometime in the future for a question?
Yes, absolutely. I'm out of the office next week from Thursday through the following Monday, but I don't anticipate any other absences, in the near term.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk with all of you, and thanks for considering us for this,
You bet.
assignment, yep.
You bet. And thank you, Krista, for your time. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Take care,
You
bye-bye.
bet. Goodbye. I will try calling the other guy to see if we can get him. Yeah, just leave him a message that.
Westerberg.
Thank you.
Let's see. This other guy's pretty
Yeah, okay.
good. It's the first time I really talked.
No,
to him.
and this is the process. We don't know if we don't talk.
Let's
And
see.
ask.
I will get his number. Otherwise, we gotta wait till noon.
Yeah, no, I understand, they're booked.
This is Larry.
Hi, Larry, say, do you have time right now?
Sure.
That would be great, okay.
Get done early?
Yes,
Everyone?
we got done a bit early and, I figured maybe we would catch you, so thank you.
Well, that's a smart move. Nobody has to sit around.
That's right. So yeah, I'd like, there's one individual on the negotiating committee here with me. I'd like him to introduce himself.
Hi Larry, hi Larry, this is John Bonsick, B-O-N-C-Z-Y-K, hi.
And you're a resident of the town?
Yes,
Excellent.
Okay. And Larry, we, we talked quite a bit on the phone earlier, and,
Right.
you've got a good deal of information, but if anything you want me to reiterate, I certainly can, or to explain to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna be perfectly frank and honest with you, okay?
Okay,
So, the nice thing about, solid waste facility siting is, unlike a lot of things in the work that I do, it's relatively simple in terms of the process. So, I was thinking this morning about what would I advise
Larry, could you, I'm gonna step back here a little bit, just so, we've got a couple, people, spectators here too, and, besides us two. If you could, just go through a little bit about your experience, where you're lobbyist for the Towns Association and things like that.
Sure.
Okay,
And I think that's how you heard of me, right?
well, I heard of you through an individual who, she gave me quite a few names, and, contacted all of you, and we're just circling back now.
Yeah, so I'm a lobbyist for the Towns Association, and I have a number of towns as clients. I have not had a town as a landfill siting client because, as we talked about, it's pretty rare. They don't site landfills every day.
Yes.
It's fairly, you'll see with the number of agreements out there for the last even 20 years, this doesn't happen very often. Even landfill expansions, but I do have a number of towns that are my general clients, just your day-to-day, business of the town, and then my specialty is in municipal environmental law. I do quite a bit of shoreline zoning and floodplain zoning and wetlands and things like that, but oftentimes it's in the context of writing ordinances and administering those rules for municipalities rather than for applicants, although I do some work for the private side too. I was the primary environmental attorney for the state legislature for about 10 years. Nonpartisan, it was a nonpartisan agency called the Wisconsin Legislative Council. I worked there for some time. I worked on a couple of landfill siting projects for the applicant or the landfill owner, and those two were both out of Gamey County. Now, I'll tell you that the negotiations between a municipal owner of a landfill and the negotiations between a private owner of a landfill are a little different. Obviously, representing Gamey County, the county itself has an interest in the public good in kind of a different way. I worked recently for Vernon County, putting together some contracts for their landfill, for their solid waste department, to try to lock up a waste stream so that they can expand and they can show that they have, the DNR's test to show that they have enough waste coming in that it makes sense to expand their landfill. But yeah, mostly it's municipal environmental work and general municipal work is what I do.
Okay, regarding the landfills, you mentioned Outagamie and, one in Vernon County. Have you worked on any other contracts or negotiated for any other, landfills?
No.
Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit about the siting board?
Okay, well, the siting board is something that you almost really will not see or be involved with, because in fact, the last I checked, the siting board doesn't even have people on it, because it's been so long since it's been used. And the reason for that is the way that the process works. Again, every step of this is really sort of laid out, just whoever your advocate is, you just read the statutes and follow the path, including setting up the committee and noticing the landfill that you do want to engage in, which you've already done. So the siting board, the role of the siting board really is it's this sort of stick hanging in the background while you're negotiating. Nobody just crosses their arms and says, "I'm taking my ball and going home," because if agreement can't be reached, then what happens is eventually both sides, in this case the town, on behalf of the committee, and the landfill operator will submit their final and best agreement to the siting board, and by law, the siting board is required to pick one. They can't average them out, they can't impose different numbers, they just have to pick one, which is a really interesting way to, it's very unlike what you'd see in a court or something like that, where the judge can
so they're used only when you don't reach an agreement then.
Right, you do have some submissions that you have to provide, which you already have. There's some submissions you need to kind of keep them in the loop as you go in terms of the process, and they, they need to know that there's a discussion occurring, that there's been a committee, local committee that's been, established and so on. But I think that's probably because if you get really close to not agreeing, they're probably gonna scramble and try to figure out how to get that board populated. So you do need to disclose things along the way to them, but for the most part, I would expect, just based on the odds, that you won't end up there. But if you do, it's a nice, it's one thing to go to court and argue for every point and make all your arguments and go through your discovery and all that. It's very, very expensive. This is a lot less expensive because it's, well, you make your arguments about why your proposal is the one that should be chosen, but outside of that, it's really a all or nothing.
Okay, okay. On those items that are sent to the board then?
On those items that are sent to the board.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
Larry, maybe you,
One more thing I guess I would say is, as I told David before, I do a lot of, phone calls when I'm driving, things like that, to fill the time from towns that I don't work for because of my involvement with the Towns Association. So if, even if you choose somebody else and there's a question that even they had, or you had, or you wanted a second opinion, I'm always happy to pick up the phone, and it doesn't have to be anything formal.
Dave, I have one question I'd like clarified in my mind when you say solid waste is simple to negotiate. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're asking me that?
Yeah, and so does like, tankers that come into the dump, what liquid, can't tell you exactly what's in there at this point in time. Is that considered a different, on a different level than solid waste?
And this is where, you'll have to make a decision about whether or not you get some technical support, right? Because some of those things are beyond my knowledge, but I do know that they use various types of things to temporarily cap the areas that they're working on. Like, for instance, paper mill sludge
Mm-hmm.
would come in a tank. There are, like you said, you don't know what's in that tank. I don't know what's in that tank.
Right.
Really, the real threshold of what's put into a landfill. There's set aside the recycling. There's recycling rules. There's temporary cover, which is often some kind of a liquid, where they don't have
Right.
that engineered system.
Okay. Would that fall into, if you would know, would that fall into, any type of extra tipping fee for hauling that type of product in?
It all depends on the landfill operator. I think that if there's I'd have to check on this, but I think that if it's a hazardous waste facility, I do think the tipping fees that the state collects are higher. But as far as what a landfill charges for its tipping fees, you know, the owner of the landfill, that's up to them. I mean, I know that in some landfills, they actually don't charge any tipping fees for the things they use as daily cover, because that's something they need to operate the landfill, and they're oftentimes hunting for that stuff and trying to, you know, maintain their flow of what they need, so it's more of a service than it is disposal. As an example, you know, when we talk about some of the things that we've done and that I've seen negotiated, you know, there's always a list of things that people who are paying attention are nervous about when it comes to landfills. One is odor, one is vectors, which basically means the gulls that you're gonna have. Usually, I don't know how it looks up there with the operations they have, but if it's municipal solid waste, you're gonna have a population of birds there. You know, to what extent that bothers someone, I'll tell you what, it bothers them a lot. Right on the eastern boundary of Appleton, right between two interstates, you know, that's busy and well developed up there. In other places, you know, gulls being on site through the certain parts of the season doesn't really bother anybody. It really is a very location specific. You know, that's why you're required to have some public hearings, and I would recommend doing more than less with your local committee, just to hear from people what their concerns are, try to engage the people who live nearby and say, you know, there's trucking, you know, I'll give you another example. In one agreement, you know, the landfill's required to, you know, street sweep. You know, there's a lot of construction debris that comes in 2 or 3 times a week, right? One of those magnet
Mm-hmm.
things that pick up the nails and then sweeping, just to make sure that you're not getting an unusual number of flat tires for your residents that drive near that area. The best thing to do is to wrap your arms around what the concerns are, not just the dollar side, right? But what are the concerns and what mechanisms are out there? I know that the most recent agreement I worked on, there's a requirement that they fly predator birds certain times of the year, which disperses the gulls. If it's just an example, right? It might not be necessary in an area like yours, but maybe you'd rather have them stay at the landfill than be dispersed to. I think the reason there that people were frustrated with the birds is because they don't stay on the landfill all day. They go to very close neighboring, you know, imagine your metal, you know, manufacturing, commercial storage kind of buildings, and there's, you know, dozens of birds on top of those roosting. That's where it gets irritating for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the best thing you can do is wrap your arms around what are the concerns, and then, you know, you'll see in these other agreements what people did to attempt to at least somewhat address those concerns, and you can always come up with new ideas too.
I should ask you also that our landfill up here also produces electricity that they resell to a power company. Is that something that's negotiable for us?
In terms of you getting some of the proceeds from that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, most of these agreements have some sort of host fee included, right? I don't know that you would necessarily tie, that's a question, you know, for, I guess, how you would rationally come up with a number that you're asking for, but most of these agreements
separate contract almost?
Not a separate contract, but just subsumed into the whole. You know, if you're gonna ask for a certain dollar amount,
Mm-hmm,
you know, per ton or however that'll work, there's different ways to do that. I think understanding that they're making money in other ways is good to know, is all I'm saying. It just, it might be worth more to them to, you know, to maintain this site versus another, or pay a little bit more on this site than on another. I don't know that I would necessarily attach it to, you know, any kind of reporting of how much electricity is created or generated. But I will say that the fact that that's there is good news, because they're generating that electricity
right,
in that gen set. They're generating it off of what causes the most odor, right? So
correct,
they're doing their best to capture the odor because that's their feedstock for that. And so, I mean, it's the methane, right?
right,
And so that's a good thing to see. It's a positive for your community. That's what they're doing.
so then your advice
Not to
is,
mention that it helps with energy security and so on.
so your advice is if it's something we could talk about with the waste management, you would just, you would negotiate that into your tonnage tip fee? Instead of a separate,
Using as a payment, right?
yeah,
It's
instead of a separate,
Is it
Yep.
negotiated as a separate
Right.
payment or part of the,
No, that's part of it.
That'd
Yeah,
be
and I would,
okay,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I think that the fundamental purpose of a local agreement is to offset costs incurred by the town. And so I guess, you know, I normally wouldn't include, you know, anything related to their generation of electricity in my negotiations, because that's not hurting you. I just think it's worth noting that that's something that is generating revenue in terms of their bottom line for the value of their landfill. And
right,
I wouldn't connect the two, because it's, you know, you wouldn't, what you're asking for is a tipping fee, you know, payment, tipping, you know, per ton payment, if that's the way you do it, to offset the impacts to the community. So that wouldn't really,
that's a plus in our favor that they're doing that, and that allows them to generate more revenue.
we could,
so it's a plus for both of you.
Yes,
But I guess what I'm saying is if it's a more successful business model, then they're not as strapped for, you know, when you're talking about what they can afford to
yes,
share.
yes.
Yep,
That's- Yep.
exactly,
Ask for more. Okay, and we had talked a little bit too about, various things to, look at that the dump may not be doing today, but may do tomorrow. Okay, maybe talk on that a little bit.
And what do you mean by that?
future,
Yeah,
expansion?
let's say future things such as, they may be doing this or may not be doing this, but things such as, recycling and things like that,
creating it ourselves.
yeah.
Yeah, what do they do now in terms of, do they accept single stream recycling or anything like that?
I can't answer
Yeah, I
that.
don't know,
I
that's.
can't answer, I've not seen the paperwork on it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, any facility that accepts really anything, any kind of waste, is fairly highly regulated, and they require, review and approval by DNR of their plan of operation and so on. So that's something that they should be sharing. If they don't have anything in there about something you're thinking they might do in the future, it's relatively fair to assume that they would have to go through a process, to get approval to change their operations. But, yeah, it kind of depends on what the thing is that they might do in the future.
Okay, if they had to, get approval for adding, let's say, whatever it is, another waste stream or whatever, does that open negotiations again?
Well, it would, you'll see in these agreements, when you look at the base agreements that you're gonna look at and review, for purposes of understanding kind of where others have gone, not invent a new wheel, you'll see provisions in those agreements that specify by contract that they're not going to, the big one is hazardous waste, right? So you'd say there will be no hazardous waste, and by saying that in the agreement, then if they wanted to do that, they would have to renegotiate the agreement.
You bet. Okay, good.
So whether it triggers it, I think the statutes really apply to the siting of new or expanded facilities. I'm not sure that the statute itself would require negotiation, but you can do that in your agreement.
Okay,
And the other kinds of things they might do or may change over time, let's say they've got when I take in my town, we've got a transfer station, dump. So when I take it there, I've gotta have our rules are, we gotta have the bottle separated, the can separated, just like it always was. A lot of places now are single stream, which is real convenient, but it takes some pretty robust equipment and a build out on the site to do that. Now, if they were going to do something like that, again, I think your residents would be much happier. That's just makes life easier. It allows them to collect more, to generate more, revenue from their sorted materials and, puts you in a better position for them to be able to be successful and for you to get your payments.
see, what is the name of that, landfill in Outagamie County and Vernon County?
So they're both just county landfills.
Okay.
So Outagamie County, just Outagamie County landfill.
Okay.
That landfill this is one of the other things that made that project a little more complicated is they have, Brown, Outagamie, and there's a third county, and I can't remember which one it is right now, but there's 3 counties up there that work together to collect all the municipal waste, and that's obviously a pretty populated area, so you're talking about a lot. So there were 3 owners of the landfill, really, in the 3 different counties, and there were also 3 different communities that were in the negotiating, in the local committee, because the landfill is located right on the boundary of town, city of Appleton, town of Vandenbroek, and it actually is now in the village of Little Chute. So 3 parties on both sides, but that's just called the Outagamie County landfill. And I think for Vernon County, it's the same, just the
Okay.
Vernon County landfill, yeah.
Any more?
Oh, Larry, what are your fees? If,
My fee is $320 per hour.
okay,
And then why don't you explain the travel time then to them also?
Sure, yeah, so, when I was talking with David, trying to make a guess as to what that'll add up to, in other words, how much time, kind of really depends, for the most part, on how often I've gotta come up there, because I'm out of Madison. What I try to do, to cover that travel time is, I've got a meeting scheduled for next
And Larry, let's say in negotiations, if you were hired, would you be available by phone for the negotiations?
Sure.
Okay,
Phone, Zoom, people make me engage with the world in a whole lot of new ways.
okay, okay, that's good. Any other questions, John?
Not at this moment.
Tom, do you have anything?
No, I do not.
Okay,
I did not catch his
Just-
last,
You hire me, and you, and we've got a long meeting, especially in the winter time. I tend to like to keep, I don't know if you can hear it through the phone, but I pace while I talk.
okay,
And when I've got a long meeting, I usually won't have my camera on because I'll be on mute while listening and splitting wood.
okay.
So that's what I do, that's what I do when I've got focus. And because if I look at a computer screen, my attention will be gone. So if I forget, sometimes clients have to remind me to go on mute when they hear the crack of the axe.
Okay.
That's about,
Okay, there's a question in the audience here.
sure.
Okay,
if Larry's last name was said, I didn't catch it.
okay, it's, I'll give you the spelling.
Konopaki.
Konopaki.
Okay,
And
okay.
you're with who again, Larry?
Stafford Rosenbaum.
Okay. Any more questions?
And how many years have you practiced, Larry?
Did you hear that?
No,
How many years have you practiced?
I haven't been asked that question. I think this might be my 20th year. It's around 20. I can't remember what year I graduated from law school.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Anything?
I think that's fine for right now.
Well, I think that works for us right now, Larry, and, I really thank you for your time and talking with us.
You bet. And like I said, if you go in another direction, don't feel like that means you can't give a call if you've got any other questions. I'm always happy to help.
You bet, I certainly will, or we will.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much,
Have a
Larry.
great day, everyone.
You bet,
Yeah, you
thank you,
too.
Larry.
Okay, bye.
All right. You're all lit up there.
Okay, should do it. Then,
Are we meeting with, or not meeting, but talking to anyone else that you have on the list? or
there's,
not?
I gotta call the one from Eau Claire yet, cause,
Okay,
I called them on the 8th and he just got back to me yet, yesterday.
okay,
It's like.
Right.
Yeah,
and that is,
Jordan was here, yeah, last night.
what,
He's from,
Wells Ready?
yes,
Okay.
and I've used them people before too. It's like-
Yeah, no, I was
it's like
just,
Whoever, it's.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we got one more then to kind of interview or talk
Yeah.
to.
I'll just see what his interest is in that and
Okay,
probably set up another one. Okay?
yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Sounds good. And how soon do we kinda need to get together with Waste Management to start to,
It's gonna be August,
okay?
about mid-August, because, one guy in the negotiating committee's on vacation.
From Waste
Yes.
Management?
Yeah.
Okay,
And I told Tina that, we're looking for an attorney anyway, so
Yeah.
we'll get the attorney and then we'll be good to go.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
And we'll get it. I don't think she made those copies yet. We'll look in here.
All right,
I'll look right now.
very good. Whew, pesky flying.
Yeah,
here.
that's things flying all over. Here, I'll look and see if she's. So I sent her a note, she was supposed to get these done Tuesday.